seems like every day in America, another book comes out proclaiming to tell you the real story of what's happening within the Trump White House. Some are written by former staffers, some are written by anonymous officials, some are written by people that claim they're the ones that got Trump elected, some are written by people that warn the country about voting against Donald Trump. But the one thing that many of them have in common, if not all of them, is they rely heavily, the pro-Trump books and the anti-Trump books, on anonymous sources. Well, now there's a book out that takes you inside the Trump White House that doesn't rely on anonymous sources at all. And it's written by a gentleman that has gotten quite a few presidents to talk with him, both for books like this and as a presidential advisor himself. The book is Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency. The president himself tweeted about it last night. Its author joins us now. Doug Wead is its author. Doug, thanks so much for joining us on TV today.
Thank you for having me. Frank, right?
That's right. When last seen. So let me ask you, what prompted you? You've written a few dozen books already about presidents and presidential history. Why did you want to go inside the Trump White House? I know you were a Ron Paul guy in 2012 and a Rand Paul guy in 2016, not necessarily always considered part of the Trump coalition, that libertarian wing of the Republican Party. What made you so eager to write about Donald Trump?
I love history, and I love to read history, and I know that in history, primary sources are everything. Anonymous means nothing. History just blows anonymous away. And the same with hearsay. When I read history, I want primary sources. So I knew somebody's got to write what Donald Trump says, what Jared and Ivanka say, what Eric and Lara, what Tiffany says, what Don Jr. says. Somebody's got to write and capture the primary sources and those voices. So that's what I went after.
How did you get the first family, and it's not just Donald Trump and Don Jr., but it's pretty much everyone with the last name Trump except Melania, to give you such access and to do so on the record?
Well, I asked for, and they thought about it for a year or so and batted it back and forth, and they had a lot of opposition internally and everywhere. I sat down with Ivanka and I said, in 100 years, there still will be books written about the Trump family, and there'll be motion pictures, the equivalent of whatever it will be in the future, about the Trump family. Whether you're viewed angrily like the Borgias and sinister family like the Medicis, or whether you're celebrated like the Rockefellers or Kennedys, will depend on what primary sources say. Somebody needs to write that book. I want to write that book. And I guess they thought about it for a year and said, okay.
Today, the president's going to London to be part of the NATO summit, and he's going to be interacting with the leaders of all the other NATO countries. He apparently, on the record, when he spoke with you, had some pretty choice words about how he felt about Emmanuel Macron, didn't he?
Yeah.
What did he say?
He's a deceitful little guy.
A deceitful little guy. Wow.
But, Frank, NATO's a great example of how the Trump White House operates and how it's misunderstood. The president just blew up NATO, and the media was going crazy. Oh, you've destroyed our oldest alliance. And the Pentagon generals came in and said, these are our friends, sir. And the president said, well, if they're our friends, why are they using our money, middle-class taxpayers' money, to build high-speed railways and new airports all over Europe and help their education, and they buy their gas from Russia, and we pay for their defense? What kind of friend doesn't keep the promises they signed on the treaty? But they are our friends, sir. So he blew it up, and he raised $100 billion. NATO's stronger than it's ever been.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what he says on that front when he's out there in London today. Now, every presidency, from George Washington to Barack Obama and everybody in between, has its pluses and minuses, and there's not been a presidential administration that has run flawlessly since the founding of the Republic. Given the unprecedented access that you had within the Trump White House here, is there anything? I understand that you are an admirer of President Trump, and you've said that history will vindicate him as one of our greatest presidents, which I'm sure is why you're now one of the president's favorite historians. But is there anything that you saw in the Trump White House that caused you to raise an eyebrow or scratch your head or be pretty critical?
Oh, well, sure, of course.
And, well, give us an example.
Well, Sun Tzu said, out of chaos comes opportunity. So for all of us, including Donald Trump, your strengths are also your weaknesses, and your weaknesses can sometimes be your strength. His weakness is he's never been a politician before, run for office, so he doesn't have the family, the army that goes with a politician who runs for Congress and then the Senate and then runs for state office. And when they go in the White House, they bring this army with them. That's an advantage. He didn't have that, so he couldn't make all those appointments. But it's also a disadvantage because the candidate becomes the prisoner of that army and has to satisfy their needs. This president has the freedom of movement and action to turn on a dime and change his opinion about some of these policies. He wouldn't have that if he had this whole army to bring into power with him.
So it sounds like that the president might not be well served by a lot of the people that are advising him and are on his staff.
Well, yeah, Jared Kushner told me that there are two kinds of staffers in the White House: those who want to help Trump save the world and those who want to save the world from Trump.
Now, these days we have to ask everybody the question, so we'll ask you as well. You don't happen to be anonymous, are you? The author.
I'm a real person, and I got real death threats for writing this book. I'll bet you Anonymous didn't get death threats.
I'll bet you he didn't. They wouldn't know where to send the note. Well, we're glad those death threats have so far proved unsuccessful. Doug Wead, we hope you come back and visit us soon.
Thank you very much.
All right. Coming up next, we will return to Florida, where John Tobacco is holding court. If I know John, probably a whiskey in one hand and a beautiful brunette in the other. Let's see if that's the case when we return. You're watching Liquid Lunch on Newsmax TV.